Bible, God's good book, God's first book in his book of books cuts through the inflation of human nonsense every time. From the beginning of the Bible until Jesus' own lips, God attaches his name to a little man named Abraham, and consequently, that's God's story for us all. And what Abraham learns, we need to learn. In Genesis chapter 19, that's a doozy. It's about sex. That's a little bit more about than sex, but sex makes people crazy, and chapter 19 is crazy. Let me just say this. When sex is not a servant, it immediately becomes a tyrant. Genesis chapter 19 is boys and girls gone wild. So come on in, let's check it out together. Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad people are showing up so that they can actually, listen to the Bible being read and talked about, because that's really what it's all about. Read the Bible, talk about the Bible. And we are absolutely convinced here at the Biblical Channel that in order to wring the chamois of our lives out the best, we've got to bring the Bible into our lives. And it's a book that has been wildly read poorly, but yet it is also read well. And when we read it well, we come away with an adult conversation from God to us. And it actually helps us to bring the greatest amount of joy into our lives and to bring success into our lives, no matter who we are, no matter how broke we are, or no matter how rich we are. That's what I love about the Bible. It cuts through the layers of humanity and makes us all the same. Anywho, so Genesis chapter 19 is about sex, and it is a crazy chapter. If you grew up in church, I doubt you heard this one read aloud on any given Sunday. In fact, you might have found it in your bedroom somewhere and thought, "Oh my," and asked mom and dad, and they said, "Oh my." Everybody says, "Oh my." We're going to tackle this one because actually it is a good story, and it's good for us because it's good for Abraham. And what's good for Abraham is always good for us, and it's what God has given to us. So let's just look at it. Let's learn from it. Let's do what we should do with it. And so we're going to need some help in this, and we always want to ask God for help. Let's just pray the way the Lord Jesus taught us how to pray, and that is, Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your will be done. Let me start over again. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who have debts against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For that's the key, isn't it? Deliver us from evil. And indeed, Genesis chapter 19, Lord, is all about delivering us from evil, giving us a better perspective maybe on sex and seeing the reality of sex. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so Genesis chapter 19 really is a continuation of Genesis chapter 18. And in some ways, they kind of are comparative or continuous. It's just a good idea to have a little refresher as to what happened in Genesis chapter 18 that brings us to Genesis chapter 19. And so let's just do a quick rundown of just that. There were three men who came to visit Abraham. Turns out these three men were just no ordinary men. They were two angels and God, the Lord above. I know. Interesting encounter. Absolutely. But it's all part of the picture of how God incarnates himself and brings himself down to human level. This is the God of the Bible. One of the more remarkable things about the God of the Bible is, human beings keep saying that God doesn't turn up, and the Bible keeps saying, well, yeah, he does turn up. And there's lots to learn from every time that he turned up. And so I don't know that we can use that as an excuse. But anyhow, these three men, two angels of God, they appear to be men. And Abe and Sarah are hospitality pros. They get to work entertaining these three, and they do a great job, which is, wonderful because Abe and Sarah are growing with God. That's part of the storyline. They're growing in their friendship with God. And so this visitation by three unbeknownst, heavenly beings, they're caught red-handed just being great people, doing hospitality like they should. Well, anyhow, in that scene, it's pretty hilarious because Abe is being brought into the inner circle. As Abe is being brought into the inner circle, the personal conversations with God are sometimes humorous. And that is, they have a good laugh about how Sarah laughed at her old age and she still hasn't had a baby yet. And it's part of the ongoing tension in this. But we're going to set that part of the story aside. And we're also learning that Abe is going to be brought into the inner circle with God, because Abe needs to understand that there is a judgment coming on Sodom and Gomorrah. And yeah, that's right, Lot, his nephew, lives in Sodom and Gomorrah, which certainly gives, an eyebrow raise to Abraham. He knows his nephew's down there. But it's all part of this friendship that's developing. And one of the things that has to develop here is Abraham has to understand the reality of judgment and how God treats judgment as well. So that's part of what's on view. Abraham is showing that he is truly a good friend of God. He's concerned about his family. He's concerned about righteousness and how the righteous might get caught up in this thing. And he wonders if there's any righteous down in Sodom and Gomorrah. And he has this big debate with God, which is super cute because, God is totally into all of our concerns. And again, it starts right here. We learn that right here, and it doesn't change at all from every page of the Bible. So Abraham is growing into this good friendship with God. Lot, however, is on a different trajectory. Lot, we might say, is arrested in his development, and he's going to end up needing another rescue. We already saw Lot rescued once. Now he's going to need another one. But before we go any further, that kind of brings us up to speed to Genesis chapter 19, which is actually a pretty dark chapter. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, so hang in here with me. But Genesis chapter 19, I'm just going to speed read it. I'm going to leave out some stuff so we get the gist of some of the important stuff that's going on. So these two angels leave the Lord. Abraham and the Lord are, in the back at the camp. The two angels go to Sodom in the evening. And Lot is sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, bowed himself with his face to the earth, and he said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house. Spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early in the morning, go your way." They said, No. We'll spend the night in the town square. But he pressed them strongly, and he said, "Oh, no." He says, "You got to come to my house." And they did. And he made them a feast, and he baked them unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they laid down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door behind them, and he said, "I beg you, brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you. You do with them whatever you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become our judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." They pressed hard against the man Lot, and they drew near to break down the door. But the men, the angels, the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck blindness on the men who were around the entrance of the house, both small and great. And they wore themselves out, groping for the door. And then the men inside Lot's house, the angels, said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Because we're going to destroy this place." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But Lot seemed to be jesting to his son-in-laws, just kidding around. Abraham, back at the ranch, went out early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like a smoke of a furnace. So it was that God destroyed the cities of the valley. God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst and overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father's old, and there's no man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. Oh. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son called Moab. He became the Moabites. The younger bore a son, and he became the father of the Ammonites. End scene. That's where our passage ends. Ooh, it is dark. It is dark. But believe it or not, there is light at the end of the tunnel if you are a Bible reader. We'll get to that at the very end. But for now, let's just move along with what we were supposed to gather up. And chapter 19 is really about Abraham growing in his understanding. It doesn't necessarily seem like that, but yes, this whole scene unfolds for the sake of Abraham so that he understands a couple realities. Abraham is growing in his understanding, and we should be growing too from this experience. And the first thing that Abraham needs to know is that God's judgment is very real, and it's very fair as well. The text goes to long lengths to show how fair God's judgment is. First of all, the 2 angels arrive to give a personal inspection. They're checking the place out. They're looking to see if there are any righteous people. They're giving time for a personal repentance, the opportunity to leave. And some of them are given the opportunity to leave, and it doesn't happen. They also, reveal that this is no knee-jerk reaction by God. This has been a long time, obviously, in the making. And God arrives to judge, but he's not a big fan of judgment. The Bible never presents God as a big fan of judgment. In fact, the Bible is at pains to remind us that God delays judgment as long as he possibly can. And the truth is, Sodom and Gomorrah, bad place. Bad place with bad people. And the other thing that Abraham really does need to learn and understand about the world, and maybe he does already, but one of the things our eyes are opened up to is just the simple fact that sex makes people crazy. The Sodom and Lot scene is literally off the hook. And then when it ends with Lot's daughters, it's way off the hook. The whole thing, it just puts a lump in your throat from every level. And the story is about Lot. As much as it's about Abraham and his growth, Lot, he ain't growing. And in fact, he's pretty pathetic. Lot has gone now to live in Sodom. And not only that, but he's a respected citizen in Sodom. So he calls these people of Sodom his brothers. He's sitting out at the gate, which is a place of, semi-importance. He's a citizen. Lot is progressing in all the wrong areas. We already identified that Lot is a man by sight. He just simply goes with whatever's appealing to his eyes. He's not a thinker, not a good thinker at all. So Lot does show, though, in the story that he is worth saving. Even though he's a pathetic man, he is worth saving. He does know that Sodom is wicked. He even says so. And Lot also shows that he too is hospitable. And he does try to steer these angels of the Lord, which I'm not sure if he knows they're angels of the Lord, but he does try to steer them away. And little does he know that they're there to check out the scene and bring a judgment to the scene. The big picture here, though, is that Lot is clearly a guy who does know better. The problem with Lot is he doesn't do better. He may know better, but he doesn't do better. And the consequences are very drastic for Lot because we see the patheticness in his own daughters, that his own silliness and his own silly perspective concerning sex, or maybe we'll just say he just doesn't take things seriously at all. And we see just an awful perspective between him and his daughters, and then that carries into his own daughters. Lot and his daughters actually reminds me of a story about myself and a big funny sticker that I had on an old truck when I was a young man. I had this old truck, this old pickup truck, and I was proud of this old pickup truck. And I had a sticker on my pickup truck that I thought was funny. And not only did I think it was funny, but my dad thought it was funny, and all his buddies thought it was funny. And I'll just tell you that the sticker on my truck was embarrassing. And here's how this embarrassing moment came up. Let me just tell you what the sticker said, and you can fill in the blanks. It said, "Born on a mountain, raised in a cave." This is what reminds me a lot, because he ends up living in a cave. Well, the whole thing reminds me a lot. But born on a mountain, raised in a cave, trucking and fill in a blank. It rhymes with trucking is all I crave. Okay, so I have this sticker on my truck, and I think I'm funny, and I think I'm tough, And obviously I have a pretty carefree view of sex, judging by my sticker. And I rolled into my grandparents' place, who are very, very good people, good Christian folks, and I knew that. And it reminds me of how I knew better, but I didn't do better either. And my father knew better, but he didn't do better either. Because I rolled into my grandparents' place with my truck and its sticker. And when I jumped out to show them the truck, all of a sudden it reminded me that I have this sticker. And you can't believe the antics that I went through to hide that sticker from my grandparents as I was trying to show them the truck. It was one of those ridiculous scenes from a movie, put my hand on it, backing up to it. Oh, it was embarrassing. I was thoroughly embarrassed with myself. I ripped that sticker off right after I left that place. But that sticker scene reminds me just of just the patheticness of human beings when we have this very worldly, low view of sex. We know better. It doesn't necessarily mean that we do better, and we should do better. Anyhow, Sodom and all of the people to the last man are just depraved. That's what the text is telling us. Both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house, and they wanted to do dastardly things. Sodom has revealed itself as being a completely lost story, man. It has lost all of its earthly usefulness, and God's judgment is absolutely timely, and it is fair. And this is part of the huge learning lesson that's going on. And the other part of the huge learning lesson is sex makes people crazy. That too's going on. And God wants Abraham and wants all of us to understand that sex does make people crazy, and that when sex is not a servant like God intends, that it becomes a tyrant very quickly. Sodom and all of the people gathered in Sodom are just the most disastrous people, representing the kind of political power sex that can be, that can come from the usage of sex, a very, very terrible, tyrannical usage of sex, used to establish dominance. This scene it's kind of like a jailhouse scene. Nobody thinks that the jailhouse, when we make jokes about don't bend over to pick up the soap, nobody thinks that the jailhouse is a place where people, gently come out of the closet to talk about the deeper portions of their. That's not it. The jailhouse is a place of brutality, and sex comes into the political dominance of a place like a jailhouse, and it can certainly go into a place of just a city or a town or a place, where this kind of idea of sex is used in tyrannical debauchery. And this is Sodom. This is the place that Lot has chosen to live. And then Lot has such a low, pathetic view. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I have a daughter, and I can hardly imagine her being married. But Lot has this attitude towards sex where he values hospitality to these two men more than he values, his daughter's, conduct and their future with their husbands, etc. And he offers them up, have sex with my daughters instead. Oh, it just makes you want to throw up. And then right at that moment, you're feeling bad for Lot's daughters, but then the scene ends with Lot's daughters, and all they have is what seems to be a very carnal, animalistic, reproductive, low-life sense that does not have any regard for morality or any touch with God's reality whatsoever. And the scene ends with this very, very dark picture of how sex is just tyrannical in people's lives. And very interesting because I got news for everybody. These kind of tyrannical, sexual, poor thinkings, they happen today, maybe in even greater fashion. Anyhow, that's a subject for a different story. But what we have to remember is that we've been taught something about sex so far in the book of Genesis. Back in Genesis chapter 2, remember, God established very clearly before anything goes wrong that sex is actually a gift of God. It's a gift from God to the husband and the wife who become mums and dads and enjoy a very distinctly intimate relationship with one another so that they can go on and make more families that populate the earth. And this is God's idea, that there would be godly families populating his great creation that he has made for humanity. It turns out that sex, according to Genesis chapter 2, is God's sign for marriage. It is the marriage sign. It's not the wedding ceremony, it's actually sex. And then when we get to Genesis chapter 16, we get a very interesting, moment between Sarah and her servant Hagar. Sarah learns the hard way that having your husband have sex with your servant girl in order to have a baby of your own creates an awful sense of resentment and jealousy. It all goes sideways for Sarah. But the text actually says that Sarah gave Hagar, her servant, to Abraham to be his wife. Now, I don't think we would hardly imagine that Sarah thought that's what she was doing. What Sarah thought that she was doing was just simply getting a surrogate child. What Sarah thought she was doing was there was just a simple sex transaction, but not so simple as the Genesis chapter 16 story went. And we covered that the last time, so go back and check that out if you didn't already. But the reality is this: sex, the earthly transaction, is actually God's spiritual transaction that makes two become one. And when Sarah gave her over to a simple sexual transaction, she inadvertently gave Hagar over to be Abraham's wife. Oh, you see, the text is actually God's view of sex. You don't just have a casual surrogacy of sex between your husband and the maidservant without there being something greater and significant going on. And that is, Abraham has another wife, and now he's a polygamist. God designs sex to be a servant of the marriage. And the moment that it's not, it becomes a tyrant. Awesome when used right, and simply awful and tyrannical when it's used wrong. This is what God is revealing. This passage shows us a few ways as to how humans actually use sex in a disastrous way. The passage is not about something that oftentimes people say that it is about. This passage, no matter what you think, is not about people who have an attraction to people of the same gender. This passage is saying nothing about that. And it's saying nothing about God's judgment on people who are, attracted to the same gender. In fact, the whole Bible is silent on the condition or the state of being attracted to the same gender. What the Bible is not silent on is the wild malpractice of sex in power, politics, religion, perversion, abuse, sport, amusement. God condemns all of our human malpractice of sex. If you want to read the Bible poorly, it's really easy. Just say more than what the Bible's saying, or say less than what it's actually saying. And it's important to know that this passage says what it says, but it doesn't say what some people say that it says, which is going to create a conversation here. It is true that today's fun suckers have abused this passage, and it's been abused on many sides of the aisle, so to speak. The text has been plainly up to this point, revealing how God incarnates himself. He meets human beings at their level. And even when they're, in a bad place, he still meets up with them at their level. And God so far also uses human ideas and human institutions without creating them or even condoning them, which is part of the problem with this text that we have, that there is a whole lot in the Bible that God simply blanks or gaps, meaning says nothing about, silent on it. And that does not give us the license to go do whatever we think or say whatever we think. We must be cautious and careful and humble whenever the Bible itself, when God himself is silent concerning issues. And so slavery and polygamy are good examples of this. People say that the Bible, God invents slavery. People say that God, endorses polygamy or invents polygamy. That is never the case in the Bible. Never is the case that slavery or polygamy is something that God creates or condones even. No. And the Hagar and, Sarah, Hagar, that whole story helps us to see both angles. Hagar is a servant, not because God made her a servant, because the world around her made her a servant. And then Hagar becomes Abraham's wife. And that was Sarah's fault and Abraham's fault as well. But now Abraham is a polygamist. Well, that wasn't what God had wanted for Abraham and Sarah. That's something they created, probably because they thought it was culturally acceptable. Well, anyhow, by no means does God condone or originate these human institutions, but neither does God outright condemn them either. There are some things that God is going to be very patient with because God is very patient, and he meets us where we are. And God's will for all human beings, no matter where they are, is that they would come to God to get a better perspective. And as they get a better perspective, they end up making better decisions that follow from that. But make no mistake, God is patient with us, and he is telling us stories that reveal how patient he really is. And this is a story of patience if I ever saw one. So let's hit this rabbit trail just a little bit, and let's hit the facts. The facts of the Bible, and this is a quick rabbit trail. The facts of the Bible are this: there are no texts that actually condemn the condition or the state of being attracted to the same gender. I'm telling you right now, I'm not speaking on my own authority. I'm speaking from the authority of many who have gone before me, very faithful men, guys like, Packard and I. Howard Marshall, bastions in the evangelical faith who wrote a little book, a dictionary of biblical terms and words. I'm not saying anything new here. This is information that's been around for a long time. There are no texts that outright condemn the condition or state of being attracted to the same gender. Neither are there texts that condone the status either. And so we must be cautious, we must be careful, and we must be humble as we proceed forward. Even the word homosexual is not in the Bible. It's only in some careless English translations that we even find that word, because the old part of the Bible is written in Hebrew and the new part of the Bible is written in Greek, and there are no correlations of words to the word that we say homosexual. No. The traditional passages cited that supposedly condemn guys and guys and dolls, is Leviticus 18 and 20. In Leviticus 18:22, it says, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination." And then in Leviticus chapter 20, it says, "If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them." Now, at first glance, it seems like, whoa, that couldn't be any clearer. It seems like God does condemn, same-sex attraction. No, it doesn't. because both of those texts, if you read backwards enough, come out of a conversation that God is having through Moses with Israel before they go into the land of Canaan, specifically prohibiting them from worshiping Moloch. And Moloch/Baal is the god of the Canaanites, and this comes out of a conversation of all of the things related to the worship of Moloch. And the worship of Moloch does entail some bizarre, wild, sexual, ritualistic practices, and they are to stay away from all said things. And so those passages have a specific, context that we have to honor. It's not saying what we think it says if we just read those sentences. Those sentences are part of a longer set of paragraphs and a longer set of contexts that specifically relate to Israel as they are going into the land of Canaan to actually bring judgment on the Canaanites. And let us not forget that this god Moloch, when Rome defeated the Carthage, even Rome was horrified by this Moloch worship, to the point where when Rome defeated Carthage in the Third Punic War, they razed the place to the ground. I mean to the ground, because they saw absolute depravity. And that Moloch hangover comes from the land of Canaan that the Bible is talking about. So anyhow, that was the slight rabbit trail. Let's get a little bit closer to home here. Our passage has been commonly misused to condemn same-sex attraction, and this passage is not talking about that. Sodom and Gomorrah, when others in the old part of the Bible, like Isaiah, a prophet, Jeremiah, a prophet, Ezekiel, a prophet, talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, they don't mention same-sex attraction in their list of Sodom and Gomorrah's problems. Here's what Isaiah says. Isaiah says this about Sodom and Gomorrah. They didn't do good. They did not seek justice. They did not correct oppression. They didn't bring justice to the fatherless. They didn't plead the widow's cause. Jeremiah says this about Sodom and Gomorrah. They commit adultery. Listen, adultery is a big package of sexual malpractice. All forms of sexual malpractice are in view here. Sodom and Gomorrah, Jeremiah says, walk in lies. They strengthen the hand of evildoers. No one turns from his evil. That's what Sodom and Gomorrah is like, according to the prophet Jeremiah. And the prophet Ezekiel also reflects on Sodom, and he says that her excess prize and excess pride and excess food and excess prosperity did not aid the poor and the needy. So interesting here. If Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel fail to mention this in their expansive view of Sodom and Gomorrah's sins, how much more careful should we be whenever we look at a text like this? All of these behaviors that we just heard about from the prophets are the kind of behaviors that lead towards the malpractice of God's good will and God's good intention for sex. And we might just say that it's the tip of the iceberg of other problems. The other problems are what the prophets are identifying. So Sodom and Gomorrah's malpractice of sex, it's just a sign of the rottenness of the Denmark, so to speak, if you know what I mean. So anyhow, let's move forward in our text. After the Lot scene, morning dawns. And it's kind of funny because Lot seems to plead for a shorter distance. He says he can't get up into the hills, so he pleads that he could go to Zoar instead. Makes me wonder if Lot is a bit out of shape because he's concerned that he might not be able to make it the whole way up into the hills. I don't know. But anyhow, it's kind of funny. Sodom and Gomorrah, though, they are razed to the ground. Lot's wife, she can't seem to understand normal things, and she fails to take the whole thing seriously, probably because she was from Sodom. We all know what happens to her. She turns into a pillar of salt because she was warned, don't look back. And it also seems like Lot has a fear of judgment now that he sees Sodom and Gomorrah gone, because when he does reach Zoar, he's afraid to live in Zoar, and it seems like Lot is now taking judgment a lot more seriously. And then the scene looks at Abraham. Abraham looks through the valley and he sees the smoke rising up, and so he knows what's happened at this point. And God, does go with Abraham, and by saving Lot's family as requested. Again, Lot did, get another rescue, because God is going with Abraham, and Abraham is God's friend, and Abraham was very concerned about his nephew, and so God honors that. And then the daughters. Oh, the daughters. The daughters, I don't even know how to talk about this. I suppose, to be fair, their thinking is misguided and ill-informed, to put it mildly. They do seem to have a concern to promulgate their father's line. Yeah. They even know that their dad would not agree. Maybe that's some sort of kudos to Lot, that he wouldn't agree to this sexual escapade. But one thing is clear about the daughters. They do not know God. They do not know the God of their father. They do not know the God of their great uncle Abe. And sadly, Lot and his patheticness are seen even further in his daughters, because, well, they're misguided because Lot is misguided. And the fact is we have too many misguided children in the world today. And part of the reason why we have too many misguided children in the world today is because the men of the house, they simply just don't teach the children anything. And they resort to a nature kind of sex that leads to this kind of, perversion and twisting of God's good intention for sex. God designed sex to be a servant of the marriage. The moment that it's not, it becomes a tyrant. And the Bible condemns the wild malpractice of sex and power, politics, religion, perversion, abuse, sport, amusement. And it's human beings that make sex tyrannical in all sorts of ways. Not God's idea, our idea. But like I said, there is actually hope in this weird ending. The hope in the weird ending comes in the fact that now that the two girls are pregnant and give birth to two sons, and that these two sons become the fathers of two countries, the Moabites and the Ammonites, well, it doesn't seem like good news yet, unless you keep reading further. And if you keep reading further, after the book of Judges, the 8th book of the Bible is a little book called the Book of Ruth. And it's true that Ammon and Moab as countries are rejected by God because they curse Abraham's children, the people of Israel. But the little book of Ruth is the sweetest of all biblical romance redemption stories. And it's all about a Moabite named Ruth. And so automatically we start seeing that despite the judgment, despite the debauchery, despite the terrible, consequences to man's and women's bad actions, God can redeem it, because God redeems this little girl named Ruth in a wonderful story with a man named Boaz. And then this story of Ruth and Boaz seems obscure until we get to Jesus. In Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, in Jesus' genealogy, Matthew specifically mentions that Jesus is his Ancestry.com. Well, Ruth and Boaz are part of that. And so it goes like this. What is the message of the Bible? The message of the Bible is very simple. It's very good news. Even if we have run down the road of sexual depravity, even if, like me, I'm really a serial polygamist in many ways, and many of us are, the good news for people like me and you is that God is actually redeeming us despite our misguided malpractice of sex and everything else. The good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is that God turns these dark, dark stories into stories of redemption and hope. Listen, the fact of the matter is we've got 99 problems and God ain't one of them. What we need to do, and what a story like this reminds us that we need to do, is to run to God for redemption, to run to God for salvation, to run to God for friendship, of which God is waiting with open arms with. Despite the troubles that we have brought on ourselves, God remains with open arms. This whole story and the truthfulness of human sexuality is not a story of condemnation, but a story of redemption to pull us, to draw us closer to God so that we might actually come to God, so that we might actually find God. And not only find God, but that we might actually find the relationship that God intends for us, that we might actually find, the patience that God has with us, and that we might actually understand that despite the troubles that we've created, God can always get us out of these troubles if we turn them all over to Him. And we'll end up with a better perspective, and we'll end up with a better view. And little by little, we will start living the life that God intended for us, a joyous and glorious life, because God will take care of the messes that we make. All right, well, there is Genesis chapter 19. And check us out the next time. See you soon.